So if you're a fan of overdrive pedals, you'll know how hard it is sometimes to narrow your choices down to what you actually want. There are so many great pedals out there, including all the safe bets by all the big brands that we all know and love. But every now and again, a new brand emerges offering something a little bit different or unique. And in this video, that's exactly what we're going to be checking out. There's a new kid on the block in the world of guitar pedals, and in this video, we're going to be checking out an overdrive pedal that they've just released straight out of the gate that has so many features and so many great tones. We're going to be checking out the Thorn Soundlabs Bad Cash. So if you've never heard of Thorn Soundlabs before, that's because they're brand new to this game. They're very much a newcomer to the market, but don't let that fool you because they've come out of the gate swinging. They've dropped a really cool collection of pedals, more of which you can find out about on the link down below in the description. The Bad Cash is the overdrive pedal from their initial launch of pedals. And what this is a very, very versatile overdrive pedal that can do everything from clean, boosty, nice bluesy tones right through to some high gain rock stuff, even verging on fuzz in some settings, which is pretty fun. And obviously, I know what you're thinking, and it's exactly the same thing I thought when I saw a green overdrive pedal. My brain instantly went to, oh, maybe it's just another tube screamer, but it's actually far from that. So I want to say a big thank you to the guys at Thorn Soundlabs for sponsoring the video and letting me check this thing out. I've been playing with this for a couple of days now and having a lot of fun with the different tones I'm getting. And I do know that initially they based the original idea around the tube screamer kind of topology, but as you'll see in this video, they went away from that pretty quickly with what this thing can do. It can absolutely do the tube screamer thing if you want it to do that, but it can also do so much more. So on the surface, this looks quite complicated because as you can see, there are 8 different controls here that we can use when dialing in our sound, but it's not actually as complex as it looks. This bottom row, for instance, we can instantly write off as being our EQ section because we've got a bass, middle, and treble control and a presence control. So all that bottom row is doing is basically EQing the sound. This is a really cool EQ because when you set the knobs at midnight, they're actually flat, and then you can cut by turning down or boost by turning up. So it's like an active EQ. So you've got bass, middle, and treble, and you also have a presence control on the end there. So that EQ section is very much like what you'd expect to see on a guitar amplifier. And then on the top row, we've got a drive control, which is the amount of gain. Our dampening control, this is very interesting. This is a really cool thing if you're stacking this with other gain pedals or using it into the front of an overdriven amp. When this is on 0, there is no dampening at all. And as you roll this up, what it does is it dampens the bass frequency. So if you imagine like you're using a high gain amp with a tube screamer in front, which is a very common thing to do, you'll use the tube screamer because it has a low end roll off and it tightens up the bass on the amp. That's basically what this control is doing. So we can tighten up those low frequencies when we're stacking this with other things, and it just kind of reins that low end in a bit more. Or if you're running this into a clean amp and you want all the low end, you could just leave that on 0 and it'll let it all through. Then we have the headroom control, and this is also very, very cool. What the headroom control does is it actually controls the headroom of the pedal. much like an amp. You can set this with a higher headroom, which means the gains will be less driven, but there'll be more dynamic range. Or you can set it with a lower headroom and it's more compressed, gets a bit more fuzzy, less dynamic range, but more gain from it. So that's very interesting, because in the 0 position, that is where we have maximum headroom. And as we increase this control, what we're doing is lowering the headroom. So when this is on full, the headroom is at its lowest and the pedal has the most gain. And then we have the output volume as well. Underneath this, we have 2 little switches that are also very interesting and very integral to what this thing can do. So one side, we have the clipping switch. We have symmetrical and asymmetrical clipping. So symmetrical clipping is a little bit smoother, asymmetrical is a little harsher. And then on the other side, we have this class control, which goes from a class AB in this position to a class A style sound. Now again, this is a little bit more akin to amplifiers. So a class A amp is typically an amp that has a single power tube, 1 channel usually, and you crank it and it gets all distorted and all fuzzy and compressed. And then AB is a little bit more efficient, more headroom, cleaner, a bit brighter and a bit punchier. So that's really cool because that actually changes the feel of the pedal. It's not overly audible in terms of like a tone thing, but when you're playing it, you can really feel the difference between A and AB. And if you're someone like me who plays a lot of small class A style combo amps, you'll definitely love that feature because it makes the pedal feel like your favorite cranked combos, even when it's plugged into a louder amp. So that's a very cool feature there that Thorn have included in this. But that is kind of it really. You know, there's a lot going on, but it's very intuitive to get started with. So let's plug this thing in now and get some sounds. All right, so gear-wise, I'm using this Baum Guitars Celesta, which is plugged into the Wong's ODS 40, which is like a clone of a Dumble Overdrive Special. That's going via the 2 Notes Torpedo Captor X. And I've got the amp running very, very clean, which sounds like this. So I'm going to start now with everything on the Bad Cash set to around midnight. I'm going to have the symmetry switch set to the symmetrical side and the class switch is set to class A. I'm going to start on the bridge humbucker of the guitar and I'm going to switch between the bridge humbucker and the neck single coil as I play. So straight out of the gate, that's an overdrive sound that I already like. It's got enough gain there for my taste and it's kind of sits in the right EQ ballpark for me. But this is a very flexible overdrive pedal. Now, what I'm going to do to start is I'm actually going to start with the dampening and headroom controls because understanding how those 2 controls work is very key to understanding in how you can dial this pedal in different ways. So I'm going to start with the dampening control and I'm going to play a bit and move that control. Now you've heard it already at midnight, so I'm going to start there, which is half dampened. I'm going to bring it all the way down, which removes all the dampening. What you'll then hear is more low end, and then I'll increase the control and you'll hear that low end going away. Now you can hear how that moves the low end quite drastically actually. So if you're pairing this with an amp that has a lot of low end, you can use that to tame it, or if you're stacking it with another overdrive pedal, you can blend the low end that way. I quite like the dampening around about here. This is where I've been using it. sound that I really like. The headroom control controls the headroom of the pedal. So think of this like an amp. A higher headroom amp is going to give you more dynamic range, and a lower headroom amp is going to give you more of that kind of compressed sag. So with the headroom in this position, we are in maximum headroom, which means the gain is slightly decreased, but the dynamics are increased. And then as we increase that control, we're bringing the headroom down, which makes it all feel a bit more squashed. I'm going to start in the middle position once again, and I'm going to go all the way to maximum headroom and then all the way to minimum headroom. Now, when I said this is a flexible pedal, I really meant that, because when you first hear that headroom control with it all set to 0, it actually doesn't really sound that great. You know, if I actually go back to the maximum headroom sound, this on its own, not a great sound. But where this really comes to life then is when we use the volume to go back into that headroom space. Now we're playing with kind of a medium gain with high headroom. I can actually back the gain off a bit more. And the cool thing with this is, because it's so dynamic, if you play softer, or then you dig in, or roll your volume back, that's where we get into some of those really interesting sounds of this, and that's where it starts to feel really cool. I really like this when you actually set the gain really low and use it like a low gain push. It's not adding a ton of gain, but there's enough gain there for what I personally do. You can obviously go to the other end of that spectrum and crank the gain, and this is with the headroom on maximum. And if you want to crank some more gain out of this, bring that headroom up. Obviously you can hear we're introducing some noise now. So yeah, you can get pretty gainy with this. I actually really like the higher gain sounds with the high headroom. That to me is a great high gain sound. And as you can see, even just with those controls, I haven't even touched the EQ yet. I can already get from like a, you know, a high gain rock sound into a clean amp, right through to like a cool bluesy clean boost. So you've heard everything so far with the symmetry switch in the symmetrical position. Now I'm going to show you the difference between symmetrical and asymmetrical, and then we're going to talk about the Class A and Class AB. I'm going to put a bit more drive back in just for this because we're talking about clipping here. So what we're going to hear the main difference with, and it is quite subtle, but symmetrical clipping is a little bit smoother, a bit more amp-like. When you crank an amp, you get nice symmetrical clipping, very even harmonics, very rich sounding and very smooth. And then asymmetrical clipping is kind of the opposite. It's a bit harsher, a little bit less smooth, and a bit more bitey and aggressive. They're quite subtle, but in the bigger picture, they really help kind of refine your tone. So I'm gonna go from symmetric to asymmetric. So it's not the biggest difference, but there is subtle differences there. And obviously as you're dialing in your tone in different ways, you can see how that would be very useful. And the other thing is the Class A and Class AB option. So I'm gonna go back to symmetrical clipping for a second. Now, everything you've heard once again has been on Class A. I'm gonna play a bit more and flip between A and AB. Now there's, again, not a ton of difference there. They're very subtle, but what it does is it actually changes the feel slightly. And this is one thing I think is quite important with this pedal, is the way that it feels to play. The AB setting feels a little bit faster and a bit more responsive. And then when I go to the Class A setting, everything kind of feels a little bit more compressed, a bit more spongy, and I guess a little bit more forgiving is a good way to put it. If you've played a cranked up Class A amp, you'll know that feeling. It's very spongy. You kind of feel like you don't have to work as hard for the notes to come out. But then an AB is much faster, more responsive, tighter, more immediate, less forgiving. So if you're playing bad, it's going to be a bit more kind of direct. So I personally prefer the feel of the A. It feels a bit more like what I'm used to amp-wise, but I like that they've included that because it does actually change how the pedal feels to play. And obviously we haven't even touched the EQ yet. Everything's literally been run straight up the middle on 12 o'clock, so everything's been flat so far. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's an active EQ. So when we're in the middle position, the EQ is flat, and then we cut or boost accordingly. So I'm just gonna play a bit, and I'm gonna cut and boost each frequency band so you can hear the ranges. So that's really cool because it's an active EQ. What you will have noticed is as I got to the extremes of the pot, in terms of turning it up, it's actually adding a little bit more gain because we're actually pushing a little bit more. So I don't know the order of how the pedal is, you know, wired up in terms of signal flow, whether the EQ goes into the gain or the gain goes into the EQ. But either way, we're basically adding something here when we boost them. So whether it's hitting the gain section of this or it's hitting the gain section of the amp, you're getting an additional boost from that EQ section, which is very cool. Now, obviously you could go crazy and have kind of maximum boost here. So that's pretty fun because you can actually get a bit more gain kick out of those. So I'm going to put this now just to my preferred settings of where I've really liked this pedal. And I've been using it kind of like this. So that's my preferred EQ settings for this. And now we need to talk about that presence control, because the presence control is really handy just for fine tuning the whole thing. So I've actually had it at midnight and that's where I've been running it. But if you're playing and you find that it's a bit too harsh, even though you might have your EQ balance kind of where you want it, especially if you're using single coils, you might want to kind of dull those down a bit. You can use that presence control to back off. Or add a lot more presence to it. They've done a great job in voicing the presence control on this, because even when you push it, it really doesn't overwhelm you with kind of high-end information, which I really like. I do find that some presence controls can be you know, a bit overbearing in that region, but actually Thorn Soundlabs has done a great job here making that a very usable presence control. Now overall, I think this is a great pedal, and as you can see just from what I've done in this video, there's so many different sounds you can get from this just by twisting a few knobs. You know, you can go from that kind of 80s-ish rock overdrive that I love, through to, like, you know, those super clean bluesy things. And then you can, you know, smash that headroom out the way and go crazy. And it actually gets quite fuzzy in some of those high settings. So yeah, very high ranging. You know, there's tons of stuff you can do with this. I'm really impressed by this. And for a brand new company, I think they've really come out of the gate strong here with this pedal. The Bad Cash, I think, is going to become a bit of a favorite from the brand. I can see, you know, so many different uses for this. As a standalone drive into a clean amp, it'll work great for that. As a, you know, a blend with another overdrive pedal or into a higher gain amp, that dampening control is going to be your best friend. So many cool uses for this. So yeah, let me know what you guys think of this thing, because I'm super impressed and I can't wait to see what this brand do next, because I have a feeling if this is what they're doing as their kind of launch point, where is this going to go in the next couple of years? And to be honest, I think it's about time we had a new brand come to market that shook things up a bit in the overdrive world anyway. So let me know what you guys think. I'm very interested to keep an eye on this brand. There's a link down below in the description where you can check out Thorn Soundlabs. So please do, they're a great bunch of guys. I've known one of them for many years through various other things in the guitar industry. So a big thanks to those guys for including me in this and hooking me up and sponsoring the video as well. I can't wait to see what these guys do, and I can't wait to spend a bit more time with this pedal and try it with different guitars and with different amps, because, you know, there's so many things you can do with this. I don't even know if I found my favorite use for it yet, but hopefully by watching this video you guys can see how versatile this is and what it will bring to your own playing as well. So yeah, check it out, let me know what you think of the sounds, and if you get your hands on one of these, I'd love to hear how you're using it and what you think of it as well. Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you very soon.